We have just learned that Ethiopia is, let's say, has a very high level of rural populations. My presentation is just about the other side of the coin. I'm talking about rural poverty and some good news somehow about what's going on a community level, and which is outside the radar of NGOs, donors, and others. So there's a lot of stuff happening outside in, let's say, in many countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, where millions of children are in formal and informal settings, not recognized by governments and donors. And they have, these settings means these are informal education instruments, schools, kindergartens, and whatsoever. If you look at this picture, this is from the West Point slum in Liberia. People say it's one of the worst slums in West Africa. 98% of the whole slum inhabitants, I mean children inhabitants, go to private schools, 2% go to government schools. So a lot of children are already in a kind of a formal setting, which means it is also a provision of child protection issues. When we look at the year 2012, we have to see that half of the world's population now live in urban areas, and the trends are increasing. And also what we have to realize is that in our perception, poor people, poor children live in very poor countries, but the reality is different. There are more poor people in the middle-income countries than in the low-income countries. When we look at Africa, then we see already that 3/4 of children are already living in urban slums. And we would also say that by 2030, 60% of all urban dwellers are children. And we have to realize that most of our programming, most of our perceptions is rural development. We're always focusing on rural issues. But when we talk even about hard-to-reach children, then we think about children in very remote rural geographies. But the very hard-to-reach children are just around the corner, like in the slums of any city. And also, not only in the big cities, we have a lot of development of rural slums in smaller cities, not only in the big ones. And then when we look at, when we talk about the lack of care, of deficits, then we have to realize that 33% of all children going to primary school in Africa, Asia, and Latin America have no chance in life because their brain is damaged by chronic malnutrition, which is also a kind of indicator of the deficit of care practices. Then we are also realizing that a lot of young children are killed. A lot of humiliating punishment is happening, especially for very young children, and hundreds of millions of children are witnessing domestic violence and all sort of crime, especially in the circumstances they are living, which are mainly urban slums in Asia and in Africa and Latin America. But what is also interesting is a kind of a revolution taking place, because when we are talking about UNESCO figures, 67 million children are maybe out of school. Maybe the good news is the numbers are all wrong. And maybe there are only half of them maybe out of school, because there are millions of children in school, especially in not recognized, unaided private educational settings. Not recognized by us, not by philanthropists, bilateral donors only fund through government settings. Here you see a picture. This is Kibera slum in Nairobi. It's the largest slum in East Africa. There are a lot of entrepreneurs. These are ex-police officers, teachers. They see a chance and community pressures to offer some sort of education. And all of them, and all the private schools in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America have a preschool or a kindergarten attached, which also means the provision of food, the provision of some sort of care and feedback to the parents, even when the environments are very smelly and dilapidated. In sub-Saharan Africa, we have hundreds of thousands of children in private education. Even in China, where there's a huge migrant population and migrant children are not entitled to go to government school, there are everywhere private schools set up, especially for this target group of children. And as you see, this is one part of Kipira slum. This is a schoolboy. Kipira slum has 478 private schools. This is in only maybe 2 or 3 government schools. This means that a whole huge proportion of children is somehow in a safe setting or relatively safe setting already. In the slums of Hyderabad, there are 918, Hyderabad is a city in south central India, there are 918 schools, and 60% of them are low-cost private schools, and they are enrolling 65% of the whole children population in Hyderabad. So you can see that when you look at the figures of India and the total enrollment, much more children are in school than the UNESCO reports will tell us. In Lagos, in Nigeria, we have 3/4 of the children are going already to unregistered schools. And I must say, when we see all the figures here on the screen, there is even no counting, there's no evidence and there is no data about small young children going to, let's say, unaided, unrecognized preschool settings in Africa or Asia and Latin America, but maybe the numbers are in the millions. There's a case study of Pakistan. This is a most recent study, I guess, by DFID, which says that 18.5% of all children are already in private schools, and very often even these schools are much better and showing much better results than government schooling. When we look who is already in, then you see on the most vulnerable left corner, you know, you don't see here bilateral donors because bilateral donors are not funding this issue, and very many NGOs have never touched the issue. But when you see there is the Ford Foundation, there's the UBS Optimus Foundation, Dell Foundation, and so on. This already, there are some attempts, you know, to address the issue of urban poverty, but also by providing funds to some sort of capacity strengthening or by some sort of, let's say, educational development for very poor, neglected, unrecognized children just around the corner. We say there is a remarkable movement is taking place because we find private schools everywhere. I came recently from Afghanistan and I tell you, even Kabul is mushrooming with private schools because the government is not delivering. It is a movement which is not owned by us and which is not hijacked by us. It's owned by communities and by local entrepreneurs. It's a movement which is not recognized, which is not on our radar, but it offers a lot of opportunities for us. When we see that, when we say call for action and the need to link the two, what we need is, we need also research. There's only one randomized control trial done in Africa in history. The results were published in January 2012, which clearly proves in a case study of Mozambique, when there is a kind of early childhood model delivered to communities, that 26% of all women could at least go for work because their children are cared for, and it has a significant impact on increased household productivity, but practically we don't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.